Hey now, today we're going to take a look at the first expansion for the very popular game Pandemic from Z-Man Games, and that is called On the Brink. This is, of course, the second edition version of On the Brink that can be played with the second edition of Pandemic itself. Now, On the Brink has a few things that can be just integrated seamlessly with the base game. You have some new event cards, you have some new role cards to randomly distribute to the players, and you actually have these cool petri dishes that you can use to keep all of the viruses, and you can even, there's even a sticker on them so that you can name each of the viruses if you are so inclined. I haven't done so yet, but I probably will actually. But the centerpieces of this expansion are actually modular. It's 3 different parts. You have the virulent epidemic cards that make one of the disease strains, the different colored cubes on the board, a virulent strain which has really bad effects in addition to the normal things that an epidemic card will do to you. You have a 5th disease, the purple disease, which behaves a little more weirdly than the other diseases, but you still have to take care of that one as well. And you have a bioterrorist. One of the players in the game is actively working against the other players, trying to make them lose the game and spreading that purple disease around the board. So, of course, as you might have guessed, each of these different things makes the game much more difficult, and you can mix and match them as well, as if Pandemic needs to be any more difficult. So let's go ahead and take a look at the new stuff that comes in this expansion. Then we're going to come back. I'll let you know what I think. Alright, I'm just going to show you the new stuff that comes in Pandemic On the Brink, and as you can see, it's quite a bit of stuff. Some of it is just cosmetic, and we'll cover that first. So you have these cool little petri dishes where you can keep the original diseases that came in Pandemic, and it even leaves you a little spot where you can write in the name of the disease if you are so inclined. And as you can see, there's a new 5th disease. We'll get back to that in a minute. You also have brand new role cards, and you're going to be able to mix these right in with the original role cards and randomly distribute them with no problem whatsoever, except for this role card. We'll get to that last. So you have just some new examples. You have the Generalist, who gets to take 5 actions instead of 4. You have the Epidemiologist, who once during each of your turns, you may, with permission, take any city card from a player in the same city with you. This is not an action, so this is kind of like the Researcher in a way. You have the Field Operative, which is really odd. You can, as an action, move 1 disease cube from the city you're in and onto the role card, and you can swap out 2 of those in place of a card when you're trying to find a cure. The last one we'll take a look at is the Containment Specialist. When you enter a city with 2 or more disease cubes of the same color, you can remove 1 of them. So those are just some of the new role cards. You obviously get the pawns for that as well. There's also new event cards, and the way the event cards work is you'll shuffle all of these up with the original event cards, and then you only use like 2 of them per player that you're playing with in the game, and you'll mix those into the deck. And by the way, with this expansion, you'll be able to play Pandemic with 5 players. I should mention that as well. So it's just some cool examples. You have the rapid vaccine deployment. You can, after you find discover a cure for a disease, and you immediately play this card and can remove 1 to 5 cubes of that color in connected cities. You have Remote Treatment, which just lets you remove 2 disease cubes from the board, which doesn't seem like much, but could be the matter between life and death if you're trying to prevent outbreaks. And New Assignment, which is kind of crazy. It just lets you take a new role card. So there's a lot more than there, but that's just some of the highlights. Now, on to the big, heavy stuff. First, we'll talk about the new purple disease. Which is kind of like the other diseases. If you let it go too bad, it might outbreak and you might lose the game. But it's different in some ways. First off, you don't have to cure it in order to win the game if you play with it, but you have to cure the other 4 normal diseases and then make sure that all the other purple cubes are wiped off the board. Or you can cure all 5 diseases. Whichever one you think is going to be easier, you can do that. And in order to cure a purple disease, you have to discard any cards of any color. You still need to get 5 of them unless you're the scientist, but it doesn't matter what color they are, as long as one of the city cards you discard has that city has a purple cube in it as like a sample, I guess. So that's one way the purple cube is a bit odd. Also, by the way, you can do one of 2 things to indicate the purple disease marker, this thing here on the board. You could either do what I did, because I'm kind of a maniac, and that is to actually put a sticker on your board in this empty spot in order to put the purple disease there. Or you can just slide this card onto the board to represent it. Whatever you want to do. I like tearing up my board and destroying it like Risk Legacy, so that option appealed to me. Now, how the, let's get rid of this stuff we've already looked at. How the purple disease comes out is also a little bit weird. You're going to have these two cards, the mutation cards, which are actually going to start off in the discard pile of the infection deck, which means that they're not going to go into the deck until your first epidemic. When this card is drawn after that, if it hasn't been eradicated, the purple disease, you draw a card from the bottom of the deck and put a purple disease cube in that city. You discard this card, the card drawn in this card into the infection discard pile. If it's eradicated, you just discard the card, and this counts as one of your infection draws as normal. So that's initially how the purple cubes are going to come out. But also, you're going to mix these into the player deck, and when these are drawn, more nasty things happen. For instance, if the purple disease isn't eradicated, draw 3 cards from the bottom of the infection deck and put a purple disease cube on each of those cities. The mutation threatens. If the purple disease is not eradicated, draw a card from the bottom of the infection deck and place 3 purple disease cubes there. And finally, it intensifies. Place 1 purple disease cube on each city with exactly 2 purple cubes. So if you draw this at the right time, it actually wouldn't be too bad out of all of those. So that's just, if you just play with just that module, it's just another nasty thing that you have to worry about. And it will, of course, increase the challenge, but it isn't played all that differently. Oh, one last thing, however. And I'm sorry, it's kind of hard to illustrate just about the board here. But if you draw an infection card of a certain color, and let's say it's Madrid, which is blue, and there happens to be a purple cube in Madrid as well, you not only add a blue cube there, you also add a purple cube as well. So in that regard, the purples can just keep escalating and escalating, even though they don't have their own set of cards in the infection deck. Oh, and by the way, there is not that many purple cubes, and you still lose the game if you have to draw one of them or put one on the board and you can't. So I guess that's everything to do with the purple cubes. The other module you can add are the Virulent Strain Epidemic cards. These are exactly like Epidemic cards as to how you set them up, decide how many you're going to play with, and the new rulebook actually has a new legendary mode where you can use 7 Epidemic cards if you're really a masochist. But each of these has a special ability at the bottom of the card that is going to affect a virulent strain. When the first of these Epidemic cards is drawn, you look at the board and determine which disease has the most cubes out. For the rest of the game, that is the virulent strain, and you'll leave this next to that Petri dish just to remind yourself of that. Now, some of the effects on these cards are continuous when you draw the Epidemic card. Some of them are one-shots and then they go away. So, for instance, this one, Complex Molecular Structure, is continuous. If the virulent strain has not been cured, you need 1 more virulent strain city card to discover a cure for it. So you're going to need 6 instead of 5. Let's say if it was blue, you would now need 6 cards to cure blue. Some of them are one-shot effects. So Unacceptable Loss says before doing this card's intensify step, before you reshuffle and put on top of the deck, remove 4 virulent strain disease cubes from the supply to the box. And if fewer than 4 of these cubes are in the supply, instead you just remove them all, which is really bad, which makes it even more likely you'll lose by that cube running out. And my personal favorite, the Hidden Pocket. Before you reshuffle and put back on top of the deck, the Intensify, if the virulent strain is eradicated, but at least 1 virulent strain card is in the discard pile of the infection deck, you flip the cure marker back to only its cured side and place 1 cube on each virulent strain city whose card is in the discard pile. So it's back! It's been cured, but it's back! Which could be really, really bad. So there's more of those too, but those are just some of my favorites. And you can mix those with the other modules of the game as well. And of course it makes it more difficult. Now, the last thing to talk about is the Bioterrorist. This is another role card, and if you decide to play with the Bioterrorist, you'll decide which player is going to be the Bioterrorist, and then the other players do all of their setup as normal. But the Bioterrorist is a bit weird in that, first off, he is trying to make the other players lose. He wins the game if the other players lose and there is at least 1 purple cube out on the board. In other words, the purple cube is still active and not eradicated. And that, in fact, is what the Bioterrorist is trying to do, is move around the board and try to sow chaos as much as possible. He has his own black pawn. The thing is, as any terrorist would do, he is moving around in secret, and that's what this pad of paper is for. This has a map a little mini map of what the board looks like. And you're going to be folding this sheet over and secretly writing down where you're starting off at the beginning of the game, where your pawn is, unbeknownst to the other players. And then on your turn, you get one free normal move, the drive or fairy action, and then 2 other types of actions in any order that you like, and you'll indicate those here using special shorthand as indicated at the bottom. So one of them is just a normal move, which you can do more of if you want to. Now, you don't start off with cards like the other players do. Instead, your cards are the infection cards. You have to use one of your actions to actually draw infection cards from the deck, and then you can use those actions to fuel what you want to do. You can discard them to get direct flight or charter flights around the board, but then you have to announce if there's been an airport sighting at those locations. You can also just infect, which means for an action, you get to put a cube, one of the purple cubes down in whatever location that you're at, but then the other players know where your location is. You can also choose to infect remotely by discarding an infection card and putting one of those purple cubes in that city. And you can sabotage. If you're at a place with a research station, you can discard a card that matches the color of that city and destroy that research station, which is actually pretty cool. Now, the reason you have to do all this in secret is because the other players can try to capture you and stop your shenanigans. And what they're going to do is, if they happen to stumble across you or if they're actively seeking you out, when they move into your spot, your pawn becomes visible and they can use an action to capture you, in which case they take your pawn, put it on their card, and the only thing you can do on your turn are draw cards from the infection deck and use the escape action, which is to discard a card to immediately fly to another city. But again, then they're going to know where you are because you have to announce an airport sighting. And one last thing, you're using the purple disease and it behaves just as it does in the other games, except that if you have an outbreak in the purple disease by using the Bioterrorist variant, it sort of burns out and you take cubes off of the original outbreak city. It just makes it a little bit weaker. And other than that, you're just trying to make the other players lose, and you're trying to win by taking all of your actions in secret, moving around, and spreading disease. That is essentially all the stuff that comes in the new On the Brink expansion for Pandemic. Some stuff you can just mix in no problem. Other things you have to decide whether you're playing with them or not. Now, let's get to my final thoughts. Now, the sort of general items that come in On the Brink that you can just add right into the base game are pretty cool. No complaints there. You have the cool Petri dishes, which are, they're just fluff, but they're neat, and they give just a tiny smidge more of theme to the base game, and the fact that you can name them as well. So I really like that. And it means you don't have to put them in baggies anymore, so that's pretty cool. I like the new event cards are really nothing that special, but there's some pretty cool ones. I mean, some of my favorites. There's one that lets you make the infection rate 1 until the current player's next turn. You can switch your roll card with this new assignment card. You can just remove 2 disease cubes from the board, which doesn't seem like a big deal with the remote treatment card, but that could really save your life at some point. And then one of the ones I found the most interesting was the rapid vaccine deployment, where after someone cures a disease, you can immediately remove 1 to 5 cubes in connected cities of that disease from the board. So they're not earth-shattering, but it's cool and it's good to have more variety, even though you're still not using all of the event cards. Obviously, you're only using a certain number of them based on the number of players. The new roll cards are also interesting. Some of them, there's a surprising amount of them in this set, so you're adding a lot of variety into the roll deck if you get this, and it's one of the primary reasons to do so. You have the Troubleshooter, which is really cool because, looking at the top 2 cards or whatever the infection rate is of the infection deck doesn't seem like a very big deal, but, it could really help you figure out where you need to be on this turn in order to avert disaster. And also, even more importantly, the ability to take a flight anywhere just by revealing a card in your hand, that is just amazing to get a direct flight. The Generalist, probably the easiest role to figure out and what you should definitely give to a brand new person. You get 5 actions, and that's great. It doesn't seem like a big deal, but getting more actions is awesome, and it just feels good and empowering. And the Archivist, which is super interesting because your hand limit is bigger, which does come up as more than you would think if you're kind of new to the game. And also the ability to grab a card out of the discard pile. There's even another role that does that as well. That is really cool. Now let's talk about the big stuff that comes in this expansion. The virulent disease epidemic cards are probably my favorite part of any of the stuff that comes in this set. it's so simple to integrate in, but it adds such a cool aspect to the game. A very difficult aspect if you're just starting off with this. Even if you've moved on to standard or even like heroic level Pandemic, you should still probably back it up to introductory and try this out first, because it does make things very difficult but very interesting. The fact that some of them are just like one-shots that could be very, very bad, or the ones that are continuous that are bad over a long period of time. I like that aspect of it, especially the cards that let you, if you pick so once you draw the card and you have the virulent disease picked, then from then on, anytime you draw a card that matches a color of that virulent strain, you have to draw another card during the infection rate. That is just bad. But the one that, the worst and the most interesting is the one that could, hypothetically, even if you've cured the disease, it comes back. It's tough for it to do that. It's not totally likely that it will do it, but it can happen. And that is just awful. So actually, I think it's fairly likely. So there's some really, really difficult cards there, but despite how difficult they are, I've never been one to shy away from a difficult game, even like a really hard game of Pandemic. I like how interesting it makes the game. So that's probably my favorite part here. My second favorite would be the purple disease. And the only reason why this isn't more interesting to me is just because it's just a little more complicated to add than the virulent disease. And it doesn't really add too much more to the experience, because curing it is the same thing. Just how it comes out is pretty interesting. And the fact that if you have purple disease in a city, it actually exacerbates the other disease that's there. In addition to it. So when you draw an infection card, you have to put out a cube of each color, so they kind of feed off of each other. That's interesting to me. But really, it just doesn't add too much more to the game that I found thoroughly interesting. So, but I like it. I would probably choose to play with it sometimes, but the virulent disease most times. Both of them together, if I think you can do that, would just be ridiculously hard. But it's still pretty interesting. I like the new purple event cards that come out in the deck that just, again, all this stuff is making the game much more difficult, so know that going in. My absolute least favorite part of this set, and I think that there's a lot of people in agreement with me based on other comments that I've read, is the Bioterrorist. But the fact is, I was very excited to try the Bioterrorist, and when I first heard about it, a long time ago, I was like, whoa, that sounds awesome. I mean, I love traitor, quote-unquote, elements in games, or even one versus all games, so this sounds like it's right up my alley. And even up to the point where we were getting ready to play, and I was, of course, a Bioterrorist, and I sat down with my sheet of paper and my pencil. I was like, all right, time to go. This is going to be awesome. It turned out to be not awesome. It turned out to be very boring and dull. And the fact is, it seems like you have a ton of power because you're going after every single other player's turn, and you get your 2 actions, you get your free move. It's like, wow, it's like, technically I'm getting 6 actions between every player's, every 2 players' turns, so to speak, getting 2 actions and a free one between every player's turn, and it's like, wow, that's a lot of stuff you can do. You never feel like you can do that much. You always feel very, very limited, and the actions that you can do are not all that interesting. It's draw a card, maybe put a cube, and maybe say, there's an airport sighting. It seems like it should be cooler, and when it's described in the book, it is. It's like, oh, you can remotely infect a place, and you can sabotage and blow up one of the research centers, but really, it's not all that exciting. You don't feel like you're doing much, and the worst part of it is, you are moving around in secret, and the other players can't see you, sort of Scotland Yard, Fury of Dracula-ish. Or what's the other one I'm blanking on? Letters from Whitechapel. And that's a cool aspect in those games because the players are actively looking for you. And there's this tenseness and this, like, you're constantly on the run. A couple of games I played with the Bioterrorist, that other players were like, who cares? Let him do whatever he wants to do. And we'll just go around and cure all the cubes that are coming out. Who cares? That's the thing. There was no rush to catch me. Now, in one of those games, they definitely should have, because by ignoring me completely, I won the game. But in the other game, they played much more efficiently and just said, screw him. We'll just, do what we're doing and actively work to take care of these diseases, including the purple one that he's dropping. And if we run into him, we run into him. And if we don't, who cares? And that kills all like all the tenseness of the situation, any excitement is completely anticlimactic. So the Bioterrorist is a really cool idea, and I'm glad that they thought of it and put it in there to have, but for me, it's just a total dud. It could have been better. I don't know how you would have done this, but if there was a real traitor element to this game where you all started off as quote-unquote the good guys, but one person really was working against the others, if there was some way to integrate that and have some sort of like blind system where you can influence the game without the other players knowing, that would probably be awesome. And we may yet see that someday, but for now, the Bioterrorist is not it, and it's not fun. So I wouldn't recommend playing that way. It also makes the game too long, in my opinion. You wouldn't think so, but it really does, even if you're playing with 2 good guys in just a Bioterrorist. It's too finicky, so I wouldn't bother with that, but everything else in this box is awesome. When you hear people say that you need to get on the brink to get the most out of Pandemic, I really think that's true, because you're going to love the roll cards, love the new variety of the event cards. The virulent disease is awesome. The purple disease is pretty cool, not fantastic, but neat. And you can forget the Bioterrorist, but everything else still makes the box worthwhile. And hey, cool Petri dishes.